What if I told you that the most profound connections can blossom in the quietest of spaces, where spoken words fade and the heart takes over? In the relentless, vibrant heart of Manhattan, a titan of tech named Richard Blackwood reigned. His digital empire spanned continents. His name whispered in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Singapore. Yet, this immense wealth was a cold comfort against the ache in his heart, a dull throb that echoed with each passing day. His daughter, Chloe, a bright-eyed 7-year-old, lived within a silent world, a world Richard desperately longed to enter but couldn't. Chloe was born profoundly deaf. She navigated life with an uncanny grace, her gestures and expressions a language all her own. But to Richard, it felt as though he watched her from behind a pane of thick glass, forever separated. Every visit to a swanky restaurant, every obligatory family gathering, every mundane trip to the grocery store served as a stinging reminder of his little girl's isolation. He'd relentlessly pursued every avenue, hiring the most esteemed tutors, investing in state-of-the-art hearing aids that promised miracles, consulting with specialists from around the globe. But every attempt fell short, each leaving the chasm between father and daughter seemingly wider. Then, on a seemingly unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, a simple act of human kindness would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. Where are you watching from tonight? Richard had amassed his vast fortune creating communication software. The irony wasn't lost on him. His apps connected millions across the globe, yet he was heartbreakingly disconnected from his own child. Each morning, he'd watch Chloe at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she carefully spread peanut butter on her toast. It was the same methodical precision she applied to every task. She'd become remarkably adept at reading lips, but conversations felt strained, artificial, like reciting lines from a script neither of them had truly memorized. His ex-wife, Patricia, now resided in sunny California, having remarried a hearing specialist. During their monthly video calls, this new husband seemed to effortlessly connect with Chloe. Richard would watch, a knot of jealousy twisting in his gut, as they laughed together through the pixelated screen, while he remained a mere spectator in his own home. He had diligently attempted to learn sign language not once, but 3 separate times. But the unrelenting demands of his career always intervened. Board meetings, crucial investor calls, the pressure of looming product launches. The demands were ceaseless. His ever-efficient assistant would reschedule his sign language lessons again and again until, eventually, the instructors simply ceased calling. Chloe attended an exclusive private school with specialized programs for deaf students. Yet, Richard couldn't help but notice her growing quiet, her increasing withdrawal. Her teachers assured him that she was excelling academically, but they also noted her loneliness during lunch breaks and recess. The other hearing children, while well-meaning, often struggled to include her in their games and conversations. Even her deaf classmates, most of whom had been signing since birth, were ahead of her. Chloe had received her diagnosis later than most, leaving her perpetually playing catch-up. That Tuesday began much like any other. His regular driver had called in sick, so Richard decided to take Chloe to lunch himself before diving into an afternoon packed with back-to-back meetings. She'd requested Maple Street Diner, a quaint, unassuming establishment nestled between a well-worn bookstore and a vibrant flower shop. It wasn't his usual scene. Richard typically favored upscale restaurants where the waitstaff knew his name and anticipated his every dietary whim. But Chloe adored their chocolate chip pancakes, and lately, he'd made a conscious effort to say yes more often. The diner was abuzz with the lunchtime rush. Construction workers grabbing quick sandwiches, elderly couples sharing slices of pie and whispered memories, college students huddled over textbooks, fueled by caffeine and dreams. Richard felt conspicuously overdressed in his bespoke tailored suit, constantly checking his phone as they waited for a table. Chloe, oblivious to his unease, pressed her face against the window, watching the bustling sidewalk traffic. Her breath fogged the glass as she traced intricate patterns with her small finger. When they were finally seated, Chloe immediately immersed herself in the colorful children's menu, pointing to pictures and making excited gestures that Richard only partially deciphered. He offered nods and smiles, desperately hoping his responses were appropriate. A young black woman approached their table, notepad in hand. Her name tag read Kesha. She possessed kind eyes and a disarming smile, a warmth that could instantly put even the most hardened businessman at ease. "Good afternoon, folks. What can I get started for you today?" Kesha asked, her gaze naturally shifting between Richard and Chloe. Richard began to order for both of them, a habit born of necessity, when something unexpected happened. Kesha's hands began to move with a fluid, almost dance-like grace. She was signing to Chloe, asking her directly what she would like to drink. Chloe's eyes widened in surprise and pure delight. Her own small hands suddenly came alive, mirroring Kesha's movements as she responded. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Richard witnessed his daughter's face radiate unadulterated joy. Chloe's entire demeanor transformed as she and Kesha engaged in a flurry of signed conversation. Her hands danced through the air with an enthusiasm Richard had never before witnessed. Silent giggles escaped her lips, her entire face animated with emotions that seemed to pour forth like a torrent. Kesha mirrored her energy perfectly, signing back with patient warmth and genuine interest in everything Chloe had to share. "She's telling me about her new art teacher," Kesha explained to Richard, her voice gentle. "Apparently, he lets the class paint with their fingers, and she made a sunset yesterday that looked just like the one from her bedroom window." Richard stared in astonishment. He'd seen the painting propped on Chloe's easel at home, but he'd been completely unaware of the story, the inspiration, behind it. As Kesha took their order, Chloe excitedly choosing her own meal for the very first time, Richard felt an uncomfortable knot tighten in his stomach. This complete stranger was communicating effortlessly with his daughter in a way he'd never been able to achieve. Chloe kept glancing back and forth between them, occasionally signing something to Kesha, who would then translate for Richard. "She wants to know if you'd like to try the chocolate chip pancakes, too." She thinks you look sad and believes pancakes make everything better. Richard forced a smile, but inside, he felt hollow. His own daughter required an interpreter to tell him he looked sad. When was the last time he'd had a genuine conversation with her? One where he truly understood her thoughts, her dreams, her fears? He had been so consumed with providing for her future that he had completely missed out on her present. Throughout the lunch, Kesha would stop by their table between serving other customers, always carving out a moment to sign something to Chloe. Sometimes she'd teach her a new word. Other times, she'd inquire about school or her favorite hobbies. Once, she even showed Chloe how to sign delicious, after she had enthusiastically tasted the pancakes. Each interaction felt organic, effortless, like two old friends catching up over a shared meal. Richard observed other families in the diner. Parents laughing with their children, kids playfully complaining about their vegetables, siblings bickering over the last French fry. All of it unfolded in spoken words that flowed as easily as breathing. He came to the painful realization that he had been grieving not only Chloe's deafness, but also his own crippling inability to adapt to her world. He'd blindly thrown money at the problem, hired countless professionals, purchased the latest gadgets, but he had never simply learned her language. Your daughter is remarkably bright, Kesha said during a lull in the lunchtime rush. She's been telling me about the books she reads and the puzzles she solves. You should be very proud. Richard nodded, but the compliment rang hollow. How could he feel pride when he was learning about his own daughter's passions and interests from a waitress he'd met just an hour ago? As they finished their meal, Chloe signed something elaborate to Kesha, who smiled broadly and nodded. She wants to know if I'll be working here next Tuesday because she'd like to come back and show me the new painting she's planning to create. Kesha turned to Richard, her eyes full of warmth. I told her I'd be here and that I'd absolutely love to see it. The simple exchange struck Richard with the force of a physical blow. His daughter was already making plans with someone she had just met because, finally, someone had spoken her language. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. But what stung the most was the profound realization that Chloe's excitement wasn't simply about being understood. It was about finally being seen, truly seen, as the remarkable little person she had always been. That evening, Richard sat alone in his spacious home office, staring blankly at his computer screen. The quarterly reports swam before his eyes, blurring into meaningless shapes. Down the hall, he could hear Chloe practicing piano. Her music teacher had suggested it as a way for her to feel vibrations and rhythm. The melody was simple, almost childlike, but her dedication was absolute. Each note seemed to echo the vibrant conversation she'd had with Kesha, a constant reminder of the connection he had witnessed, but remained unable to replicate. He found himself typing "Sign Language Classes Manhattan" into his search browser, only to close the tab immediately. How many times had he initiated this same search? How many appointments had he scheduled and subsequently cancelled? The familiar wave of self-justification washed over him, a comforting balm to his wounded pride. He was, after all, building a company, managing thousands of employees, making decisions that directly impacted people's livelihoods across 3 continents. Surely that held more weight, more significance than learning a few simple hand gestures. But even as he desperately clung to this rationalization, Richard knew he was lying to himself. The vivid memory of Chloe's face, so alight with joy as Kesha signed to her, stubbornly refused to fade. For those precious 20 minutes, his daughter had been completely, unreservedly herself. Animated, curious, funny, and fully engaged. She told stories, asked probing questions, and even cracked jokes that Kesha had translated with genuine laughter. It was akin to witnessing a butterfly emerge from a cocoon he hadn't even realized existed. His phone buzzed incessantly with another urgent email from his demanding development team. But for the first time in years, Richard allowed it to go unanswered. Instead, he rose from his desk and walked down the hall to Chloe's room, where she was meticulously arranging her stuffed animals in neat rows on her bed. She looked up when his footsteps vibrated faintly through the floorboards. She had learned to sense his approach long before she could actually see him. "Daddy," she said aloud, her voice carrying the distinctive cadence of someone who couldn't hear their own speech. She patted the bed beside her, an invitation he rarely accepted during his evening work hours. Tonight, however, he sat down among the menagerie of stuffed penguins and teddy bears, feeling like a giant awkwardly perched in a child's world. Chloe eagerly pulled out her sketchbook and proudly showed him her latest drawing. A picture of 3 people seated at a table in what was unmistakably Maple Street Diner. She had drawn herself in the center, Richard on one side, and on the other side, a woman with kind eyes and quick, expressive hands. Above their heads, she'd drawn small, whimsical bubbles, each containing intricately drawn hand shapes, like miniature sign language thought clouds. Richard's throat tightened with emotion as he meticulously studied the drawing. In Chloe's artwork, all 3 figures were smiling, their hands positioned as if caught mid-conversation. It was her hopeful vision of how things could be, if only he would take the initiative to learn to speak her language. She pointed to the drawing, then to herself, then to him, and made a gesture he didn't recognize. But her expression was hopeful, questioning, as if she was tentatively asking whether this cherished dream could ever actually become reality. "I want to learn," he said aloud, knowing she could clearly read his lips. "I want to talk to you the way Kesha did today." Chloe's eyes widened with uncontainable joy, and she immediately reached for her phone. Opening the Notes app, she typed quickly, "Really, Daddy? You're not too busy?" The simple words hit him harder than any scathing boardroom criticism ever could. Have you ever realized you've been missing what mattered most while chasing what felt urgent? Let us know in the comments. That night, Richard made a life-altering decision, one that would irrevocably change both their lives forever. But he also knew that the path that lay ahead would test him in ways his unprecedented business success never had. The very next morning, Richard did something he had never done in the 15 years he had been running his company. He cleared his entire schedule for the entire week. His assistant, Paula, a bastion of calm professionalism, thought he had completely lost his mind when he instructed her to find the best sign language instructor in the city and book him for daily lessons, starting immediately. Daily, Mr. Blackwood? For how long? She asked, her voice carefully neutral despite her obvious confusion. However long it takes, he replied, surprising himself with the unwavering conviction in his voice. And Paula, I want you to reschedule the Tokyo investor meeting. Push back the product launch review. If anyone asks, tell them I'm learning to communicate with my daughter. Within hours, Richard found himself sitting in a small, unassuming classroom in Greenwich Village, across from Maria Santos, a deaf instructor whose patience seemed truly infinite, and whose teaching style was unlike anything he had ever encountered in his fast-paced corporate world. She began with the absolute basics. The alphabet, simple greetings, fundamental concepts. But she demanded his complete and undivided attention, relentless practice, and unwavering commitment. When Richard's phone buzzed insistently during their very first lesson, she simply pointed to it and then pointed to the door. The choice was clear. For the first time since building his vast company from the ground up, Richard experienced the humbling vulnerability of being a complete beginner. His hands felt clumsy and uncoordinated, stumbling through basic signs like a child learning to write. Maria would demonstrate a gesture with fluid, almost poetic grace, and Richard would respond with what felt like mechanical approximations. But she never showed frustration, offering only gentle corrections and encouraging nods whenever he showed even the slightest improvement. Meanwhile, back at home, Chloe began peppering him with questions about his increasingly late arrivals home from work. Richard would simply sign learning, one of his first successful words, and then point to himself and then to her. Each night, they would sit together at the kitchen table, both of them diligently grappling with their respective challenges. He with his clumsy attempts at sign language, and she with her mountain of homework. Sometimes, she would giggle at his awkward attempts, covering her mouth with her small hands, but her eyes always held genuine encouragement rather than mockery. By Thursday, Richard could confidently fingerspell his name and hers. By the following Tuesday, he could sign, I love you, and how was your day? When they returned to Maple Street Diner exactly 1 week after their transformative first visit, Richard's heart pounded in his chest with nervous anticipation. Chloe carefully carried her new painting, a vibrant landscape depicting rolling hills and a bright yellow sun that seemed to radiate pure joy from the canvas. Kesha greeted them with her usual warm smile, but her eyes widened with pleasant surprise when Richard signed, in careful, deliberate gestures, Good afternoon. Thank you. His hands shook slightly, and he knew his form was far from perfect, but Kesha's face lit up with genuine approval. That was excellent, she said, signing simultaneously. Chloe beamed with pride and immediately launched into a rapid-fire barrage of signing, telling Kesha all about her painting, her week at school, and her immense excitement about her father's progress. Richard managed to catch perhaps half of what she shared, but, for the first time, he felt like he was truly a part of the conversation, rather than a mere bystander passively waiting for translation. When Chloe asked, with an expectant look, if he wanted to try the grilled cheese sandwich, he understood her question perfectly and signed back, with growing confidence, Yes, please. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. As they shared their meal, Richard realized that this was just the beginning of a much longer and more challenging journey. But, for the first time in 7 long years, he felt like he was walking beside his daughter, hand in hand, rather than watching her from a frustrating distance. He knew that the hardest part was behind them, but the most beautiful and profound discoveries still lay ahead. 6 months later, Richard and Chloe had established their own cherished Tuesday tradition at Maple Street Diner. But now, their conversations flowed effortlessly in a comfortable mixture of signs, spoken words, and the comfortable silence that comes when two people truly understand each other. Richard had progressed from basic vocabulary to complex discussions about Chloe's soaring dreams of becoming an artist, her favorite books, and even her occasional frustrations with particularly challenging schoolwork. Kesha had become far more than just their favorite waitress. She'd become a vital bridge between two vastly different worlds and a dear family friend. She patiently taught Chloe new signs during their weekly visits and had thoughtfully helped Richard navigate the more nuanced aspects of deaf culture. Through her gentle guidance, Richard came to understand that sign language wasn't simply about hand movements. It was about expression, about body language, and about a rich, visually oriented mode of communication that his daughter had been yearning to share with him all along. The true breakthrough moment came during Chloe's 8th birthday party. Instead of the usual awkward gathering where Chloe smiled politely while others sang songs she couldn't hear, Richard had arranged for a deaf clown who performed exclusively in sign language. He had also secretly arranged for several of Chloe's school friends to learn how to sign happy birthday in ASL. When Chloe saw her hearing classmates signing to her for the very first time, tears of pure joy streamed down both their faces. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in their everyday routine. Morning conversations over breakfast now routinely included Chloe sharing her vivid dreams from the night before, something Richard had never even thought to ask about in their limited spoken exchanges. She told him fantastical stories about flying over rainbow bridges and swimming with dolphins who communicated in sign language. Their bedtime stories had been transformed from Richard simply reading aloud, while Chloe politely watched, to interactive tales where they eagerly took turns describing magical adventures, their hands painting vibrant pictures in the air. Richard's business partners had initially been skeptical of his new, less demanding schedule, which now included protected time for sign language practice and attending Chloe's various extracurricular activities. But they soon began to notice that his decision-making had become far more thoughtful, his leadership style more empathetic. Learning to communicate with his daughter had, in essence, taught him patience and attention to detail, qualities that positively enhanced every aspect of his life. On this particular Tuesday, Chloe presented Kesha with a brand new painting, the same diner scene from many months prior. But now, all of the figures' hands were moving in animated conversation. The thought bubbles above their heads contained not just hand shapes, but also hearts, flowers, and smiling suns. When Kesha saw the painting, she embraced Chloe tightly and declared that it was the most beautiful and heartfelt artwork she had ever seen. As they prepared to leave the diner, Chloe signed to her father, "Daddy, are you happy now?" The question was deceptively simple, but her radiant expression revealed that she already knew the answer. Richard signed back, "Very happy, because I can finally hear you with my heart." It was a poetic phrase that Maria, his sign language instructor, had taught him, one that perfectly captured how sign language had opened not just the lines of communication, but also a deeper level of understanding between them. Walking home through the bustling Manhattan streets, Richard watched his daughter's hands dance, as she described the fluffy clouds overhead and the interesting people they passed. Her silence no longer felt like a barrier standing between them. It had become the solid foundation for a richer, more meaningful connection than he had ever imagined possible. If you enjoyed the story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining this journey with Richard and Chloe. And remember that sometimes the most profound conversations happen not with our voices but with our hearts.